Hello and welcome to the second installment of the 2023 Winter Oyster Webinar Series. While we wait for attendees to join us in the webinar, I have some Valentine's Day themed oyster puns to keep you entertained as you trickle in. So, first pun. Why did the lady oyster turn down her boyfriend's proposal? Because it was lackluster. Don't. And of course, why do oysters make bad lovers? Because they are shellfish. Ha 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 ha. All right, those are all the terrible Valentine's Day themed oyster puns that I have for you this evening. And I'm seeing people in the webinar, so I'm going to go ahead and get started because you care less about what I have to say than about what we're actually here to talk about tonight, which is oyster shell recycling. So, hello again. I'm your host, Allison Albert Gercio. I'm the marketing manager with Oyster Recovery Partnership. Tonight, we will be learning all about shell recycling. That is ORP's specialty, and we're going to talk about why shell is a mission critical resource for us and how all of you can help us collect it, which directly helps our mission to restore the Chesapeake Bay's native oyster. So before we get started, I need to cover some quick webinar housekeeping. And next slide, please. Yep. So we are offering live captioning for this event. You can turn it on in your toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Also, this broadcast is being recorded and we will post it on our YouTube channel in the days following. Participants, this is a webinar, so your lines are muted and your cameras are turned off. We will have some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. We will not be we will not be looking for questions in the chat. So be sure that you submit any questions that you have through the Q&A feature, also at the bottom of your screen in the webinar toolbar. I have to acknowledge Mom's Organic Market as our wonderful sponsor for the Winter Oyster Webinar Series. We are very lucky to have Sean Lynch with us this evening from Moms. So I'm going to skip all the things I would normally say to introduce Moms and let Sean do that for you. But just know that Moms is a fantastic partner that's helped make this series possible. We couldn't have done it without their support. Next slide. A little bit about ORP. ORP is the nonprofit expert in Chesapeake Bay oyster restoration. We are working hard to restore the Bay's native oyster, and we do that by building sanctuary reefs, rebuilding public fishery reefs, supporting oyster aquaculture, recycling oyster shell, which is what we're here to talk about this evening, and getting the public involved through hands-on volunteering and events. And since our founding in 1994, and with the help of some major restoration partners like the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science Horn Point Laboratory, we have planted over 10 billion oysters and recycled more than 280,000 bushels of oyster shell. So that is a massive quantity, and we're just going to keep on trucking, keep on doing what we do until there's no need for us to do it anymore, which hopefully will be sooner rather than later, which is a weird thing to say, but true. All right, so you can support us by a number of ways, and I'm just going to mention a few here briefly. Obviously, we love a financial contribution. $20 plants 2,000 oysters. So thank you for any support you can give us. You can also eat oysters locally sourced from the Chesapeake Bay. And I believe Sean and Mom's Organic Market offer local oysters for sale. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. You can shop ORP merchandise and of course, purchase from the partners who support us. You can designate for a few more days, you can designate ORP as your Amazon Smile charity. Amazon Smile is unfortunately going away on February 20th, but you've got a few more days for your purchases to count towards ORP. Buy local seafood, and of course, visit oysterrecovery.org to learn about all of our programs. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Okay. We are going to kick tonight's webinar off with a really great poll, and we've got a visual clue for you here. So while we wait for that poll question to come up, I can't tell if it's going or not, so I'm just going to keep talking. This question is about how many bushels of oyster shell it takes to fill a full planting vessel load for a 1-day planting trip. So we stuck a bushel basket up there for you for reference, and your answer options are 500, 1,500, 2,500, or 5,000. And while you're thinking about your answer, I just want to make sure that you know that we have one lucky winner will win an awesome prize package from ORP and Moms tonight, consisting of a $50 Mom's gift card and an ORP hat or t-shirt of your choice. So I will announce that randomly selected winner at the end. So be sure to stick around in case you are that lucky person. All right, how many? Let's see. Okay, everybody's answered the poll, so let's go ahead and share the poll results. Poll results. Awesome. You guys are so smart. How did you know that? It takes 2,500 bushels to fill a full planting vessel load. Way to go, people. You know things that we didn't even expect that you would know. All right, so now it is time to meet our speakers, which is the people that you are really here to hear from this evening. So I want to first acknowledge our behind the scenes coordinator, Kaylee Fleury. Kaylee is making things run smoothly in the background. Thank you so much, Kaylee. And next we have Tommy Price. Tommy is the Shell Recycling Program's operations manager with ORP. He's been with ORP for over a decade. Hey, Tommy, I see you there. I'm just curious if your nose even registers oyster stink anymore, or if you've like become immune to it.
I become nose blind, definitely, for better or worse. Yeah.
Nothing stinks like an oyster stinks. So bless you. It's a dirty job and somebody's got to do it. All right. So I'm going to also introduce Sean Lynch. Sean is the Environmental Research and Partnerships Manager with Mom's Organic Market. Sean, if you're ready, I'm just going to pass control over to you and let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Allison. I really appreciate it. As Allison mentioned, I'm the Environmental Research and Partnership Manager for Mom's Organic Market. And I'm going to give a brief rundown of our partnership with ORP. We've been really happy to partner with ORP since 2019. And we partner with them to recycle oyster shells. And we recycle them at all of our DC, Maryland, Virginia stores and our Philadelphia area stores as well. You can bring your shells to any of our locations and contribute to building the oyster reefs in the bay. And from our 4+ years of partnership with ORP, Moms has recycled 81,000 shells, which plants up to 810,000 oysters. We're really proud to be a partner with ORP and to contribute to the reseeding the bay with oysters. So I'm gonna pass it over here to Tommy in just a moment, but thank you so much for listening and being here tonight. And again, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, because I'll be on the panel at the very end. And I'm now going to pass the reins over to the oyster recycling expert, Tommy Price.
All right. Well, thanks, Sean. Appreciate you guys having me on here, and I'll be covering the shell recycling program and why oysters, and specifically in my case, oyster shells, are so critical for restoration of oyster populations in Chesapeake Bay, and a glimpse of kind of the life of the shell after you recycle it. So yeah, what we'll cover today, a lot of different things, some stats, locations, just really important things of what this program does. So without further ado, let's just stay right here on this slide and talk about oysters. Main thing that I want to emphasize is filtration. A lot of you guys have probably heard like the 50 gallons per day stat of what oysters can do. They're cold-blooded, so this time of year it's not quite 50. But in like perfect warm, getting ready for spawning conditions in the summer, they can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day, which is pretty cool. Allison had a joke. Mine's not really a joke. It's just a funny comparison or analogy. So think of oysters as like their oyster bar where they live is like an all-you-can-eat buffet. But unfortunately, the food never stops coming and your friends start leaving and you kind of just get smothered in all this food because it never stops coming. Well, that's the algae that oysters eat. And imagine if that food around you is perishable, it's decomposing, and in this case, that algae dies and it's consuming oxygen. So oysters are really needed to basically go in there and finish off all this algae, because algae is coming from runoff from the land, nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and oysters are really good at helping to control those algae blooms that really cloud up the water and also just suck oxygen out of the water when they die. So that kind of has a BMP, a best management practice thing, which I think our next speaker, Olivia, will talk more about that and their role in climate change and stuff like that. The next big thing about oysters is habitat. They are reef forming. We don't have really corals in the Chesapeake Bay, but oysters can really go three-dimensionally up in the water column, and that's habitat for crabs, rockfish, perch, all these commercially viable, highly marketable seafood products that Maryland's famous for. So aside from habitat, that three-dimensional structure, shoreline resiliency. Again, Olivia will talk more about that. They kind of help prevent erosion. That's going to be a big problem, obviously, as you see sea levels rise and climate change, and that's everything like that. And they also help prevent like turbidity. So as stuff comes off the land from rain, algae reproduces rapidly from excess nutrients. Oysters take up some of that and keep the water basically from churning up everything, getting the water dirty. So cleaner water from oysters helps sunlight get through, and that helps submerged aquatic vegetation, photosynthesis, helps put more oxygen in the bay. So again, we'll get into that more in the next one, more the climate change and their whole role in the ecosystem. But that's kind of the cool things that oysters just do and why they're important. Just get that off the bat. So why are oyster shells important? That's the big thing. You see this picture here. We've got a pile with hundreds, millions of oyster shells just sitting out there just drying and aging. Well, oyster shells are the preferred natural substrate for oyster recruitment. And recruitment is basically the metamorphosis of oysters from their larval, their swimming form, into what we call spat-on shell. So when they stick to shells, and I'll go over this more, it's what we do with the hatchery. Talk just briefly, oyster shells they're in short supply. It's a commodity, much like anything else, like a mineral or a, lumber or something like that. They're very vital for restoration, but also the commercial industry. And oyster shells kind of changed in the last century. Oyster shells now, a lot of oysters go to market or restaurants, eaten on the half shell. Historically, they're mostly shucked for consumption to be cooked So you have like shucking houses that shuck all the oyster shells. That shell would stay put, easy to basically, aggregate and then put back out later. One of the kind of cultural shifts is oysters on the half shell, going to markets, going to restaurants. And our job now is to kind of counteract that and go and return that shell, get it back into aggregation sites that can go back into the bay through the hatchery process. So that's enough about like oysters and oyster shells. Let's move on to the nuts and bolts. Next slide for just an overview of the Shell Recycling Alliance. So you may have seen this sign. That's our kind of go-to restaurant. Follow that shell, kind of breaks down how everything goes. Most of the time, it actually doesn't start with the diner. It starts in the kitchen. So when they shuck an oyster, they will automatically have one half shell that will be discarded. That one hopefully goes in a bucket. The other half with the shucked oyster meat goes out to the diner. That gets consumed, hopefully goes back to the kitchen, back in that same bucket with the other half shell, goes into another container, and then we pick that up usually weekly. Some places a little bit further out, especially winter, they can wait a little bit longer, but we have 3 trucks now. You'll see a side view of a truck later. We have 3 of them now. That's new. We've always stuck with 2, and this year we're starting with 3. So looking to get this program back on its feet, pre-pandemic levels, and really get some shell. So the next thing is that shell has to age. You can see in the first slide, and then that one in the bottom right, our shell pile. It's just open field, Eastern Shore, pretty rural, sun, wind, rain. It just really kind of decomposes naturally. It's the cheapest way to do it, and it's really the most efficient. And we also have to age it, not just to decompose the stuff, tissues, but also there's some oyster diseases, depending on where the oysters are from. We need to let them sit out and basically dry out and have those oyster pathogens basically die from exposure. And then we use it when it's kind of like bone dry. So we'll go over the hatchery process a little bit more, but basically from there, it goes through University of Maryland's Horn Point Oyster Hatchery, goes on to a planting vessel after it's gone through the hatchery process, and we plant it on reefs where they are really monitored. And we check on the health of them for our commitments to the Chesapeake Chesapeake agreement at the EPA level and state level. So here's some more photos. We'll go into some typical containers. We wheel them out of the restaurants. 32-gallon container can hold about 2,000 shells, weighs, depending on where they're from, 200, 250 pounds, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. We measure everything in bushels. So that picture on the right, that is a standard wooden bushel basket. It's about 9.5 gallons. So think of like 2 5-gallon buckets. That's the easiest way to think about, when we're talking volume, just convert to something that you're more familiar with. And there are like Maryland bushels and Virginia bushels, slightly different. I'm just going to say bushel because there is like a standard US bushel. So picture on the bottom left, that's one of our trucks. We travel all over the place from Pennsylvania all the way to Ocean City, Maryland, collecting tons and tons of shell. So as you can see, that thing holds quite a bit. We're really limited by weight so much as volume because oyster shells, you guessed it, they're pretty heavy. So we try to keep an eye on weight, take a rough estimate. There's a maximum amount by volume that we can take using an assumed like 70 pounds per bushel, which is a little high, but it just makes sure, if it rains and all the containers fill with water, we've got a little wiggle room. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of the nuts and bolts of it. Move on to the next slide. So here's the hatchery shell pile. You can see that's, upwards of 100,000 bushels right there, just all around this pile and one behind it. And we'll use that in the summer. Every year that hatchery will go through 100, 120, 140,000 bushels some years. And that's just us. Another 100 to 200,000 will go out on different counties unseeded, just for public bottom for oyster reefs. And some of those will get harvested. Most of ours will go to sanctuaries. We can talk, I think Olivia will talk more about different sanctuaries around the bay. And I believe last year there was another one that went over the hatchery process and where ORP plants. But yeah, our Shell Recycling Alliance, we are the largest one network in the nation. So by volume the most, and also the number of restaurants. Like I said, we have 3 trucks now. It really was only 2 for most of this this program. And we're about 29,000 bushels in 2022. So not our highest, but definitely a rebound, considering at one point we only had 1 truck. So really cranking away to get those oyster shells from restaurants. Really appreciate all the restaurants helping us out. You know, it takes a little bit to save the shell. It takes a lot sometimes to really like put them outside, and especially high volume restaurants just constantly moving buckets outside to fill the larger containers that we take and replace. So this year, we're also going to come up on 300,000 bushels of shell. Right now, we're at 285,000 bushels. If you look at that pile right there, imagine 3 of those. And it's generally just been 2 or 3 guys for the last 13 years. So we put some miles on those trucks and ourselves, and those shells all get washed. So they'll go through a whole nother process that our field crew will have to deal with. And that just makes sure that it's the cleanest surface possible that we can send to the hatchery. So just, yeah, it says almost 10,000 tons of what we've directed or redirected from landfills. So we're all very proud of that. We'll move on to the next slide. So locations, these are where the public drops off shell. Now, I will say that the vast majority of our shell comes from like restaurants. Like right now it's about 200. We're still probably this spring with the new truck going to add some more. We also have 70 public drop sites. That's, I think, 13 counties plus Baltimore City. And I think Baltimore County is about to come on next month. So basically any public, you know, municipal, like a transfer station or recycling center. Some counties have like 15 of those. Some will have like 1 or 2. Good example, St. Mary's County. In 2020, they were almost in the top 10, and that's competing with restaurants, because it's just a cultural thing that people eat lots of oysters at home and they know to save those shells. And that's really, I mean, we've done some education there, but that's just a culturally ingrained thing. Really cool. Shout out St. Mary's County, keep doing your thing. And we also do a lot of shell recycling events. This is going to be, it's kind of bull and oyster roast season. A lot of firehouses have them. Come spring, lots of like St. Patrick's Day stuff, spring events, all sorts of stuff, especially like here in Annapolis, we'll have lots of spring activities all over the place. And then also, we'll go to our next slide. We have our big celebratory top 10. We've just released these, and this is last year's. This is when we announced last year's. It was, as you can see, some of these, you know, they're just pretty big establishments. They're, you know, old school places like the DC Fish Market. They crush it. I mean, they're doing 2,000 bushels there almost a year. So some new faces there too, some local ones, some ones that we've had since the beginning. I think Boatyard and Old Ebbitt Grill, those are some of the original members, and Old Ebbitt Grill is one of the ones that they're Shelly, our mascot on the right, and some of the staff at Old Ebbitt, they were ones who really helped get this off the ground through their Oyster Riot event. So much shell at this one event and 2 nights actually, but we actually bring a full 10-yard dumpster. So they're really good. Some of the original partners, definitely support them. And also, you know, kind of the old school places like Captain White's Seafood at the DC Fish Market. There's Captain Sonny White himself right there receiving a celebratory oyster knife in congratulations for his efforts over the years. They've done something like 10,000 bushels just in that little market. Go to the next slide. Talk more about events. Yeah, we're kind of in like the winter oyster roast season. Once it gets warmer out, we'll definitely start seeing more us going out to weekend activities where we not only set up a booth sometimes, but we'll drop off containers and take those with us. Fall, right at the start of oyster season, another great time that we're out really spreading the word about importance of oysters, but also the importance of the oyster shells. That being said, our big event is, I think, September 28th, The World is Your Oyster. We celebrate all that we do. We recycle every single shell that comes in there, have all sorts of oyster farmers that we partner with come in and they shuck. We've got a oyster tonging demonstration. You can see in the top right, have a little boat there. And it's kind of a great way to kind of simulate, if people have never held tongs, just the work that some watermen do. And that's obviously without the water too, in a rocking boat. So fun activity for folks to play around, see what folks in the oyster industry do. Yeah, just if you want to see, on our website, oysterrecovery.org/SRA, we have a whole list of all the restaurants, and just our Instagram and social media will have just highlights of different events that we attend. We'll go to the next slide. So here's the one that I will preface this by saying, if you want to learn more about this, we will send a link that has kind of a narrated hatchery overview from the director of the hatchery. It's video, goes really in the weeds about how they operate the hatchery system. But let me just give you the on the half shell version, real quick and dirty. The oyster shells, we aggregate them in a shell pile. They'll sit for about a year minimum. And that's again to let the natural decomposition process kind of eliminate diseases, and also rain just wash off some of the dirt and whatnot, and cocktail sauce. So the first thing when they get to the hatchery, after they've aged, we'll actually send them through a shell washing process. That conveyor belt in the top center photo, that actually on the other side has basically a tumbler, trunnel, I think it's called trunnel, and it basically has a power washer that blasts all of the remaining dirt off that shell. And after it's washed, it goes on that conveyor belt. It's loaded into usually those stainless steel cages. Each one of those holds about 20 bushels of shell, and each one of those tanks on the upper right will hold about 8 of those cages. So, 160 bushels of shell in one of those tanks that you see. On the upper left, they're actually bags. Each one of those is about a half bushel, it's like a 5-gallon bucket full of shell. Those are used for oyster gardening programs, and also for oyster aquaculture people, oyster farmers that want to have their own leased areas. Often they'll rent tanks, or they have their own tanks, and they'll do basically a miniature version of what the hatchery does, which I'll get to. Basically involves rearing larvae and collecting live, basically stud oysters. They go out in the winter, they get the oyster shells, they get the oysters, they control the temperature, and they control the diet of algae they eat, and basically simulate the spawning season. So you can see those tanks in the kind of center bottom. Those are kind of the staging tanks where they have those, they call them brood stock. Those are the parent oysters. They're going to live there and eventually start spawning. They will watch them closely. Male and female oysters will be identified by emitting sperm or egg. Slightly different in what they look like, just the process in which that happens. They collect those sperm and egg meat, create the little larvae oysters. Those larval oysters actually swim around, they're kind of free swimming, and those are introduced, you can see in that upper right picture, into these tanks through a process of really fine screens. They can actually separate the free swimming oyster larvae, and in a 5-gallon bucket you can have millions of little free swimming larvae and introduce them to those tanks, and they'll sit there for 48 hours to up to a week, and they'll just kind of flush around, some bubblers, some circulators in there. And then they'll remove the tanks, sorry, the cages. Cages have the shells. Oyster larvae have stick to those shells. Take each one of those cages and actually dump them on the planting vessel. And that planting vessel will chug on over to wherever the designated oyster planting location is and drop them overboard using actually a fire hose most of the time, just to, kind of a less abrasive way to force all those little spat on shell overboard. As you guys saw in the poll, that boat holds about 2,500 bushels of shell. So I think that's really cool. I'm a huge wooden boat guy too, so I think it's really cool. Not only are we restoring the bay, we're keeping waterman culture, wooden boat culture alive. That's a decades old, almost 70-foot wooden workboat, buy boat that we're still employing to put oyster shells out. So I think from personal level, that's pretty cool too. But that's basically it, what we do with the oysters and the oyster shells. I think that's the last slide. If you want to hit one more. Yep, so that's it for me. Obviously there might have some questions. I'm happy to answer any of those in the Q&A later, but I will turn it back over to you all.
All right. Great. Thank you so much, Tommy and Sean. If you have ever if you've ever presented a webinar, yeah, COVID times, post-COVID times, whatever, it can be really unnerving to just talk to a computer screen and not get any, reaction from any kind of audience. So I just want to say kudos to both of you. And if you feel the love, send them a kudos in the chat or whatever, that you both did a great job. Thank you so much. I have the extremely fun job of announcing our giveaway winner, which again is a $50 Mom's gift card and a hat or t-shirt from ORP. And tonight's giveaway winner is Emily Parkhurst. Emily, you are our lucky winner. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you live near a Mom's store location and can take advantage of that gift card. We will follow up with you after the fact to make arrangements for you to get your prize. So without further ado, we have time, as much time as you guys are willing to stick around. Actually, I'm just kidding. We'll sign off at 7:15 to address some of these questions, and we've got plenty. So let's bring Tommy and Sean back onto our screen. Hey guys.
Hello.
We've got some really great questions. And I'm going to start with one for you, Sean, because I really love this question.
Sure.
It is, does Moms offer oysters that are locally sourced from the Chesapeake Bay? Can someone go to a Mom's store and get Chesapeake Bay oysters?
Yes, and great question. Thank you for that. We partner with True Chesapeake Oyster Company, and you can go to Moms in all the regions that I mentioned, and you can order True Chesapeake oysters through our Moms, and then you can pick them up there. They come in various counts, and yeah, so you can order those, and then when you're done, you can bring the shells back and recycle them.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So we answered that one. Tommy, this is a question for you, and it's
Sure.
pretty simple. So, what's your favorite thing about working at ORP?
Oh man. Well, I should say I started working at ORP for kind of selfish reasons because I love to fish too. Oyster reefs are great fishing spots, but I love the tangible, you can see what you've done at the end of the day. I think that's hard to describe how great that is, but also really easy because there's a giant pile of shell there. So that's a simple way. I love being able to see the work that I've done every day.
All right. We have a couple more questions, Tommy. your favorite question
Yeah.
that I know you love to get about the expanding the program. So
Mhm.
I'm just gonna
I see a
lump,
couple
lump
related
a couple,
questions.
yeah,
Yeah.
lump a couple into one. So specifically expanding to Pennsylvania, the
Yeah.
York area, and expanding shell collection to Boston. And while
Mhm.
you answer, I'm going to find that link to shell recycling programs across the country and share that through
Sure.
the chat.
I will start with the easier one with Boston. Unfortunately, probably not us, but there is a group called the Mass Oyster Project that we have actually worked with and actually shared a lot of our information, talked about our database, our containers, our routing stuff. Um, they are a growing one. I highly recommend you reach out. Good folks. Pennsylvania. So we started in Pennsylvania. Actually on a grant and help from Sustainable Pittsburgh. So that was something that we had a lot of assistance kind of financially from NOAA, the federal government. Um, Not quite sure why Pittsburgh, but we do get a lot of shell there. And to answer your question about how would this possibly get started, if you know anybody that has space to put a large dumpster, obviously this dumpster is going to smell in warmer months. So if you know a place where shell dumpster can get stored, that's the first step, because that's always the trickiest part, is people tolerating some of that smell in the summertime. So I'll if you can get back to me on that, that's a huge step forward.
And I have to mention James Henry Thies. He is so willing to help us as a volunteer. So James, we will make sure that you and Tommy get connected after this webinar to discuss ways that you could potentially help shell recycling in the York area. Okay. All right. Sean, another question for you. And it's about other shell recycling efforts at Mom's. What else does Mom help assist in recycling?
Oh, thank you. That is a great question too. Yeah, we actually have a huge recycle center at all of our moms. And the things that we recycle are cell phones and tablets, batteries. We accept compost at all of our moms locations, shoes, of course, the oyster shells, and cork. And then a couple times a year we have campaigns where we just recently finished our holiday lights campaign, where for 2 months before and after Christmas, we accept holiday lights. And then denim, we recycle denim as well. So you can kind of go to Moms and check out all of those things. And if any of those resonate for you, you can drop them off at our locations.
And that's actually, they're really easy to find. They're usually right by the front door and they're all clearly labeled, right? What you can
Yep,
recycle in what bin.
exactly.
And that leads me, actually, no one asked this question, but I'm going to ask it because it's something we struggle with, to a question about trash and shell recycling. Tommy, can you address the trash that's intermingled with oyster shell and what we do about it and what people can do to help us prevent trash among
Sure.
recycled shell?
So our biggest thing is education. Especially those dumpsters. We really have to keep an eye on those. Somebody sees a free dumpster, sometimes they don't even read what's on that sign. They'll throw stuff in it. So we've got to check. We do have some that are locked. So if you come across one that's locked, I will tell you right now, combination is 410. I'm not afraid to say it. I hope you don't put trash in it, but otherwise, we do have things called shell pile cleanups, because inevitably shell will get trash mixed into it, especially stuff, scraping plates at kitchens. So ramekins, plastic forks, napkins, gloves, things like that. So if you're interested, we do sometimes do shell pile cleanup events. If you have a group, Boy Scouts, school, church, team, what have you, if you're looking for something to do, in my opinion, that's the most valuable hands-on work that we do. We have other things as well. So cage building, if you're into shell bagging, it's a lot of work, but we offer that too.
So shell pile cleanups are best in the cold months when the shell
Yes.
pile is not as stinky.
Yeah, I do not recommend it past April. And even sometimes in April, it's pushing it. Unless you have a very, I don't know, you you're tolerant of that kind of stuff.
Okay, we've still got some great questions, so I'm just gonna keep rolling until 7:15. So someone's asking about an underrated oyster restaurant that
Oh man,
we might not know about who participates in the shell recycling program.
it's hard to pick favorites. It really is.
Yeah,
Allison, do you have any? Because I'm gonna get in trouble if I say single out one.
yeah, I actually think that you should check the list of SRA restaurant partners that I shared in the chat and try to find a new restaurant that might, be in your area, because we definitely don't play favorites with our partners who recycle shell with us. We just appreciate them.
I'll follow up though. One more quick thing I forgot to say, those top 10, support them. They're hugely important. I didn't mention the stat, but 1/3, like 32% of all of our shell in our entire program comes from those top 10. So they're exponentially important. And I do have a crab cake preference, but can I share that one?
Well, this is Tommy's personal preference.
Yes, this is
not an ORP endorsed preference. Yeah.
Denson's Market in, oh no, never mind. I can't say it because they closed down.
There you go. Okay.
Yep.
I was gonna say something, but I forgot it. So I'm gonna answer a question, which is someone asked, when will festival tickets go on sale? And I assume you're talking about World is Your Oyster Festival, which is ORP's large annual fundraiser happening in September that Tommy spoke about. I think festival tickets are happening in May. Kaylee, if I am wrong, please correct me in the chat, but I'm pretty sure that our festival tickets will go on sale in May. So if you are not already following ORP on social media or receiving our newsletter, please make that right. Okay, next question. This is a funky one, Tommy. How do you foresee this program growing or changing in the next 5 years?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And we did that a couple of years ago, and there's some things that I never could have expected, especially 3 F550 big trucks. I never saw that coming, and I'm very fortunate that we can do that. But I see expansion, as Mr. James Henry Thies said, different areas further away. If we can find places where folks can aggregate that shell for us to pick up, less frequently, that's a huge help. So infrequent pickup further away, and also more involvement with folks bringing stuff to public drop sites. As the education, as the word gets out, we hope that folks will either convince, we have a couple counties that do not have recycling places right now, and also places, any place that wants to set up a public drop site where folks can leave shell. We're happy to work with you guys to set up more places for folks to leave them.
All right, I'm gonna ask one question from the chat because I think it's important, and then unfortunately we're gonna have to end our time. Sean, I'll give you an opportunity to make a closing remark. But so Tommy, the question is, how do we recruit restaurants to participate in the shell recycling program? Can you address that?
Sure. We have a pretty, not overly sophisticated, but a routing system. So we do have certain trip routes that we go once a week. And we look for places that we either learn through the grapevine or through, just looking at menus, how much shell they have, what their volume output is, and how close to the current route they are. Or if they're a big enough restaurant, how do we bend our route to fit them in? So it's a lot of looking at menus, not easy to do before lunchtime sometimes, and also just word of mouth. Sometimes we'll stop in, cold call, but a lot of times we're also reactive instead of being proactive and finding them. Recently, we've had a lot of restaurants contact us asking to join. Unfortunately, we kind of have a wait list right now. We had some mechanical issues and the supply chain, getting trucks repaired, set us back in the fall a little bit, but we're in the rebuilding 3 trucks, adding new restaurants. If you know a restaurant, either shoot it our way or ask them if they're interested and they can reach out to us.
All right. So, Sean, do you want to make a closing remark before
Yeah,
we?
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Really appreciate everyone attending tonight. I love that people are interested in oyster recycling and learning all about oysters. And thank you to ORP for running this webinar. It's really great to partner with ORP, and thank you all for supporting them.
All right. Thank you everyone for attending. We hope that you will join us for the final webinar in this series on Wednesday, March 1st on oysters and climate change. Everyone have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks, folks.